Hello, Richard from budgetguitarist.com with a little presentation today called Getting Started Writing and Recording Your Own Music in 20 Slides. This is slide number 1. Here's slide number 2. Okay, so songwriting versus recording. These are two very different skills that can totally work together, but we're going to talk about them separately. Now, just one caveat about this whole presentation. This is an overview. I'm not going to be able to teach you how to write a song and how to record it in a YouTube video. This is an overview. If you want to learn more about any individual thing in this video, leave it in the comments section and I'll see what I can do. So getting started. To write a good song, you must first write a whole bunch of bad ones. Maybe there are some exceptions to this, but in general, practice makes perfect. And you can't expect that the first song you ever write is going to be stellar. So be willing to write a bunch of songs and just consider it practice. Maybe you'll end up with something really good, but don't be discouraged if the first handful of songs you write kind of stinks, because that's how it is with most people. So some people write on a keyboard or on a guitar, or they got a laptop, they use a cool loop. There's no rules. Use whatever you have. If you have an acoustic guitar, electric guitar, portable keyboard, that's fine. Your phone is great for capturing ideas. Almost everyone I know does this, and it doesn't matter if it's iPhone, Android, whatever. As long as you've got a way of capturing ideas whenever you get them. You get a good melody in your head or an idea for a chord progression or a song topic, record it right there on your phone. There are a lot of different ways to write songs. So I'm just going to give you a few ways that I write, and this is as an example. I'm not trying to say emulate me. I'm just saying, here's how I do it. So for me, sometimes I'll start with a chord progression, and I'll improvise a melody over it. So I'll be sitting at the piano, and I'll think, well, what's a chord progression I haven't used yet? Something unique, Other times I might come up with a melody in my head and it'll get stuck in my head, and I'll just sort of figure out what chords go with that melody. And usually with any melody, you have a bunch of options for chords. And so you just try a bunch of different chords till you find what sounds good. Sometimes I might sit down and just pull up a cool drum groove, and then get out my bass and play a bass line. I'm not really an actual bass player. I'm a guitar player who plays bass. But when I get on a bass, I think differently. So I might put down like a cool bass riff, and then that'll get me going. Maybe I'll make a track out of that. Sometimes I'll come up with a cool guitar riff that I think is cool, and I'll just improvise a melody over it, and then I'm off and running. So again, there's really no rules except to capture. And honestly, that's not even really a rule. It's just a really good idea. One other bit of advice that's not on the keynote here. You have an inner censor, right? You've got an inner music critic who's going to be like, that stinks, that's stupid. Every time you try something, you got to shut that person up when you're writing a song, when you're trying to write. Just capture the ideas. Get the ideas down. Worry about what's good and bad later. That's how I do it. What about somebody else? Let's look at Genesis, especially post-Gabriel. Just as an aside, is it my imagination or do Mike and Tony kind of look a little baked in this picture? I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Anyway, so what Genesis would do post-Gabriel is they would just jam for hours. Just come up with stuff and riff off each other. And when they would come up with something good, they would record it to cassette. Of course, they didn't have smartphones back in the era of Duke and Avocab. So they would just end up with all these ideas on cassettes, and then they'd go through all the cassette ideas, and they would come up with songs. And sometimes they'd write the song, and Phil would just kind of improvise vocal melodies over the ideas. And so there's some footage on YouTube of these guys doing that, which is kind of an interesting approach. So let's look at a couple other ideas for songwriting. Loops. So GarageBand, Logic Pro, Ableton Live, Studio One. Most computer software programs give you the ability to play around with loops. And sometimes you can just find a cool drum loop or a cool keyboard loop, and that can give you some ideas. Now, if you're using loops that are built into the program, the DAW, GarageBand or whatever that you're using, then you can use those loops as a rough draft, or they could even end up in your final mix. Who knows? For keyboardists into electronic music, they'll do something similar with Ableton Live, which comes with tons of loops and sounds and stuff. Now, I like Ableton Live. I use it when I perform live to do backing tracks and automate my lights and my patch changes and my keyboard sounds. But in terms of composing, I feel like whenever I'm using it, everything sounds like electronic. It sounds like electronic music because, duh, that's really what Ableton Live was designed for. But if you do traditional music like I do, rock, which is bass, drums, guitar, keyboards, vocals, Ableton Live is too electronic for me. GarageBand and Logic Pro have got loops that I think are more in tune with the whole classic rock, blues, jazz, backgroundy kind of stuff. And I will say this, even though they both come with loops, GarageBand is a little bit easier to use. Logic Pro is kind of like GarageBand with like 10 times as many features. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, so let's talk about recording, shall we? You can record without a computer. It can be done, right? There's a whole movement online on YouTube of people who hate computers and they don't want to use computers and they go out of their way to not use computers. You can do that. You could also ride a horse to work. And I mean, honestly, horses are cool, but I can't give you advice on writing without a computer. If you hate computers, this whole process is going to be pretty complicated, and I'm not the guy to listen to because I am a techie guy. Computers will give you all kinds of crazy power that you will not have any other way. So if you want to record without a computer, good for you and good luck. I'm sure there's a video out there for you somewhere. It just won't be this one. All right, so now we get to this thing. Mac or PC? Coke or Pepsi, right? Android or iOS? The real answer is you can use either. Me, personally, I use a Mac. I prefer Logic Pro and Final Cut Pro for my audio video needs. To me, I've tried all the DAWs. I like Logic Pro the best. Flat out, hands down. But I mean, you can use a PC running Windows. There's all kinds of good digital audio workstations for PCs. Basically, all of them except Logic Pro, which happens to be my favorite. Now, just to let you know, in my house, I use Macs for audio and video. I've got a PC running Windows 10 for gaming on a tower. And upstairs, I have a home arcade I built, and that's running Ubuntu Linux. So I'm not just only an Apple guy. At work, I use both platforms too. Anyway, I'm a Mac guy. I can tell you about the Mac. There's other channels can tell you about Windows. So when we are talking about recording on computers, let's talk about cost. When you're looking at cost, think big picture, right? And so you can buy, at this point in time, you can buy a 2020 refurbished M1 Mac Mini for a little under $500 on Amazon. That's not that expensive, right? That's totally reasonable. And if you are looking to buy a Mac, if you don't have one already, don't look at any of the Intel stuff unless they are crazy cheap. Don't buy like a $400 or $500 i7 Mac. Get yourself an M1 or an M2. They're 4 times as fast. And another thing to look at if you're new to Apple and you're new to the world of Mac, when you're looking at the M1, the M2 Macs, 8 gig of RAM is more like 16 gig of RAM on like an Intel machine, whether it's Mac or PC. You don't need as much RAM. That said, get the RAM you can afford, right? You're wondering why I have that picture. I'll get to it. If you've got the money, get 16 gig of RAM or more. And if you've got the money, get a 512 gig SSD drive or more. Because the one thing about the current generation of Macs is they're not upgradable. Think of it almost like an iPad or an iPhone. Whatever you buy, that's what it's going to have. In terms of RAM, that's understandable because of the way they architect the system on a chip. Like, it really is a legit reason. In terms of not being able to upgrade the internal storage, that's corporate greed, basically. I like to say that being a Mac user is a lot like dating a supermodel who every once in a while will just slap you for no reason. It's like, you don't like that, but we're talking about a supermodel. I think I'll move on now. Let's talk about digital audio workstations, shall we? To me, on a Mac, the path is pretty clear. If you're brand new, GarageBand is the easiest DAW to use on any platform, in my opinion. And then once you master it, you move up to Logic Pro, and it's like It's all the same stuff, but you have more tools. Logic Pro is $199, and it's got enough pro-level plugins and keyboards and drum machines. You might never need to buy anything else. It's got pitch correction, it's got reverbs, compressors, delays. It's got literally everything you need for $199. There is no other DAW on Mac or PC that can touch Logic when it comes to bang for the buck. Now, is it the best keyboards? Is it the best audio plugins? No, not necessarily, but it's all really good stuff. Now, for loop-based music, though, Ableton Live seems to be the most popular way to go. If you make electronic music, I wouldn't recommend Logic Pro. I would recommend Ableton. But you're watching budgetguitarist.com channel, so you're probably a guitar player. Every DAW has its own group of religiously devoted fans, right? And so I'm a Logic Pro guy, but on my computer I have Studio One, I have Cubase, I've got Reaper. At one point I had Pro Tools. So let's talk about it a little bit. Studio One and Cubase both strive to be easy to use and powerful, and the cool thing about both of those two is you can kind of pay to upgrade the software as you go. That's a cool model. I like both of those. Pro Tools is industry standard for recording studios, and most songwriters hate it with a passion. They think it sucks and they use something different for some really good reasons. Pro Tools is almost designed for like you're doing a live session with drums and 15 drum mics and all that. It's got cool tools for that, but it's not going to give you all the stuff that Logic Pro gives you, and you have to rent it each year. You have to pay a subscription. Logic Pro is $199, period. Reaper is something you're going to hear people talk about. Reaper is the most powerful and complicated DAW on the market, in my opinion. It's got its own programming language you can use. And if you are a professional level recording studio owner and you want to streamline your whole process, Reaper seems like a really good choice. But if you're brand new, it's by far the hardest DAW to use, in my opinion. It is not a good choice for beginners, and you will spend more time learning how to use it. So that's just something to keep in mind. So I said I like GarageBand and Logic Pro, but what if you want to use Cubase or whatever? Well, whatever DAW you choose, there's tons of how to get started videos on each. So you could just go into YouTube, and if you're not sure, watch a bunch of how to get started for each of the DAWs, and then see what looks like it makes sense, to you. Now, on the PC, if I were going to run something, I'd be looking at Cubase or Studio One. Honestly, I think Studio One's a little bit easier. But, there's good tutorials for both. They're both good choices. Okay. So, whatever computer you have, whatever DAW you've got selected, what else do you need? Well, you're going to need an interface, and you're going to need a microphone. In terms of an interface, it's something that connects a microphone or a guitar to a computer. I like the Scarlett 2i2 in the budget range, and if you got a lot of money, I like the UA Apollo Solo or Apollo Duo, because they come with state-of-the-art plugins. They both come with like a big collection of really expensive plugins that if you wanted to buy just the plugins, it'd be four figures. And they sound ridiculously good, and they're what professionals use. Now, for a microphone, for recording vocals, it's really hard to beat the Rode NT1A. Honestly, it's great on everything. And if you're able to get another microphone, well, if you want to record guitar amps, the Shure SM57 is an industry standard. You can buy them for about $100. The NT1A is probably a little over $200. It's somewhere around $200. But there's also, if you're really on a budget, there's some starter kits you can get that are great. So here's a Scarlett Solo Studio. Now, the downside to this is only going to give you one microphone input. That might be limiting down the road, but you get a set of headphones, you get a good sounding vocal mic, you get a cable, and you get an interface, all for around $209. In terms of budget deals, I think that's about the best. So what else do you need? Well, in addition to a mic and an interface, you're going to need a cable like USB cable or Thunderbolt 3. If you have a microphone, you're going to need an XLR cable. On the Mac, you might need a USB to Thunderbolt 3 adapter or adapters. You're going to need a microphone stand, and you're going to have to come up with some way of monitoring while you record. Now, you can use regular headphones for this, but really, if you just use any old headphones, you might have the sound of the headphones in the vocal mic. So you would want to use in-ear monitors, which you can get a good pair for $100, or closed back headphones. I like the AKG C240s, I think they are. That's not in the keynote here. So what about when you want to mix your music? Well, you can mix with headphones. People do it. But if you're serious about it, I'd recommend some powered speakers. And personally, I like the KRK speakers, or I like the Cali. I actually bought the Calis, and there's a video about that on my channel here. And of course, you're going to need a set of cables to go in from your audio interface to your speakers. We are almost done. Speaking of being done, though, you're never done if you own a home studio. People who own home studios will tell you this, because you're always going to find inexpensive and expensive ways to upgrade. When you decide your vocals sound bad, you can build a portable vocal booth for under $100. And I got a video on my channel on how to do that with PVC pipe and packing blankets. When you decide your mixes sound bad, you might consider putting up some sound treatment on the walls. If you decide your guitar tone sucks, then you could consider an HX Stomp or something similar, and on and on and on. But one piece of advice everyone will give you, and it is very true: never wait. If you've got an idea for a song, record that thing. Don't say, well, one day I'll have good enough equipment. If you've got a computer and some of these basic elements, you got good enough equipment right now. Go ahead and record it. I mean, heck, you can always re-record it later. Use what you have, always. Here's the thing. I have 6 albums that I've self-released. I started in the early 2000s. My first album was called Florida Songs, and the first track on that album was recorded with GarageBand. It's called Pieces on the Ground. There's links to my music down below. You could go dig that song up if you want to. The audio quality is not great. But that whole first album I made on a Core 2 Duo Mac with 2 gig of RAM. And I used GarageBand. During the project, I switched over to a really early version of Logic Pro. I think it might have been Logic Pro 6 or something like that. I needed a dongle. I do remember that. I mean, I recorded an entire album on that. Right now, my phone has more power than that old Core 2 Duo Mac. There are no excuses. So there's a lot more to discuss, but this video, again, was just an overview. There's YouTube videos on every topic, and if there's anything you want to learn more about, I'd be happy to make a video. You can learn this stuff from me. You can learn this stuff from any number of sources. Take everything with a grain of salt. Have your own experiences, etc., and so on. If you have any questions, put them below too. I'd be happy to answer them. Sometimes people email me, and we get going back and forth in a big email thread. Actually, that usually happens weekly. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this helpful. If you did, you could always subscribe if you haven't already. I appreciate you, and I will see you again next Friday at 5.